So we're going to explore what it is that Miles comes to understand in the novel. And firstly, this is a novel about personal discovery. So as Miles grows up, he gains new perspectives about his own world. He moves from a world of innocence to see his own world in more realistic terms. And so he comes to realise these things. Life is complicated. It's full of trials. Life can be cruel, and that's a reality. And some people's experiences are far more extreme than others, of course. But this is something that you come to understand as you grow up. That you sort of, as a child, you're in a bit of a bubble and protected from the harsh realities of the world. And so I think that what we learn from Miles's point of realization is that it's how we do deal with these experiences that comes to define us. It shapes who we are, and our values and our attitudes and our behaviours. So he also comes to realise that his father is not a nice person. He doesn't care for his children, he's violent, and he's certainly a real threat. And he understands that there are many people in the world who are caring and compassionate, and these people influence us. So, for example, he sees the prejudice that George experiences, yet he realises that George is not affected by it. George is a really kind and caring person, and he doesn't allow that to influence who he is. Okay, and he doesn't allow the influence of others to change, who he is and what he stands for. So Miles learns from his experience with George that you should be yourself regardless, and you shouldn't be swayed by by other people's attitudes and prejudices. George also reminds Miles of the positive influence that his grandfather had on him. And there are some nice little scenes there where he has these memories of George sitting by the fireplace smoking his pipe, and that really allows him to transport back to that lovely time he had with his grandfather. Now he understands also that people's behaviour is shaped by their circumstances. So, for example, Auntie Jean wavers between being compassionate and being bitter because of her life experience. So perhaps once upon a time, Jean was more compassionate all the time, and she was a lover of life, but the experiences that she had with her husband Nick, she obviously would probably have known about the affair as well, and then the tragedy of his death, and that, being left alone, she decides to take her brother-in-law, Miles's dad, for all he can get by making him buy out the boat, and then she's selling Granddad's house so she can get good share of it. And there's some really nice scenes in the novel. There's one in particular where the boys go over for dinner, and Parrot describes the brand new thick carpet, and it's just a world away from what Harry and Miles would ever experience. And it sort of shows the fact that she is out for her own personal gain, and she's a bit more greedy, I suppose, a bit selfish compared to when she was younger. And then there's that little scene within there where I think it was Miles finds in the cupboard, he finds the clothes, the infant's clothes that were never worn, and that just sheds a little bit of light on who Auntie Jean is, and maybe she wasn't able to have kids, and she laments that, and so she looks to Harry and Miles as sort of surrogate children, but it's really complicated. So she loves them, but she's driven by the anger of the experiences of the adults. So lots of nice things to look at there. Now Miles also understands that he can rise above his own hardship, and he knows that he must leave at the end of the novel, and that George says to him, "Don't look back." So this idea is you've got to move forward and rise above it, and define yourself by your own means, by stepping out of that life. He also knows that he loves his brothers, and he never blames Joe for leaving, and he does not need to forgive him either. They understand the circumstance had led to that. They're both, all three of them are victims of circumstance, and so Miles doesn't blame Joe for leaving. We see that we just wonder at the end, if only Joe had been around, he hadn't tried to leave just before Harry's death, had things been different, and it's one of those many what ifs in the novel that we can look at. And I think that's the idea, that we're compelled to wonder, if only these circumstances were different, would Harry still be alive? And at the end of the novel, we're aware that they will look after each other, and that their bond will never be broken. So from this experience, it has made them stronger. It's forged their relationship more. Paul Kelly has a great little line in one of his songs where he says, "What doesn't kill you makes you weaker." But I think in this case, the cliche is it does make you stronger, and we see that for the boys. Also, Miles, through unraveling his memories, he realizes that the truth can set you free. And so that becomes his personal quest to really get to the bottom of what actually happened on the night of the car crash. And it comes back to him gradually, and that is his moral awakening. Obviously, some of the adults around know what happened, or they know parts of it, and they could fill Miles in and give them different perspectives. Auntie Jean obviously knows about Mum and her mental state, her quite fragile state. She probably would have known, or at least suspected, about the affairs, so she could have presented that sort of picture for Miles, and certainly Dad knew the truth from the point of the car crash and beyond, so he could have provided that as well. As a reader, we don't get that, and ultimately that's not really important. What is important is that Miles comes to that point of understanding, and he's entering the world. He's becoming aware of the greater world, and that it is complex, and that people's behaviour is inconsistent, and it's things like love and jealousy and shame and all those emotions that drive our inconsistent behaviour. Now, whilst it is really tragic, it's sad, we're all sad for the death of Harry, Miles knows that Harry's now free. They bury his treasures in the dune at Cloudy, and Harry becomes a part of the land. He joins the many people who've contributed to that landscape. He's part of the rich temporal atmosphere that hangs over the land. So there's a real atmosphere that is developed there. That it's temporal. It really it's timeless. And the story of these boys, while it's set in the 1980s, really could be set at any time. Okay, and there's the Aboriginal midden, and that represents the Aboriginal people's presence in the spirit of the land, and that Harry becomes part of that. He contributes to that atmosphere, because he, like what they bury in the dunes, Harry is a treasure. And there's a little quote that says, "And Harry was free to stay here now, free to run along this beach until the end of time." And so certainly at the start of the novel, they talk on the first page about abalone and it being a real exotic creature, and Parrot uses the word treasure, and I think Harry, he becomes something that represents that treasure as well. Now, it's up to you, but if you do read deeper into the novel, you can explore it as a contribution to the discourse of the Australian identity. So what I mean by that is that the stories there is an ongoing conversation about the Australian identity and who we are and what we stand for as a nation. That there is this ongoing narrative or discourse conducted through the literary tradition of Australia and Australian novels and Australian films. Okay, so you could conclude that, like Miles, Australia has grown up. It's no longer a child. It's time to stop looking backwards. We're no longer the child of Mother England anymore. We're no longer a convict nation. We're a progressive nation, one that's looking to the future. So, like Miles, we haven't forgotten about where we've come from, but we have risen above hardship and we do have integrity. And I think that's an interesting concept to explore, and certainly that's going to be a sophisticated idea that will stand out in the HSC marking centres. Now, finally, the experiences that Miles has shape his worldview. How he responds to the people and the events in his life define him. The parrot constructs Miles as a virtuous character, and as readers, we test our own values against Miles. And this is really important, I think, and this is what the role of fiction is on that broader scale. So as readers, we use this fictional experience to reinforce our views of the world. Maybe they challenge our views of the world. So we gain an insight into one experience, and this is Miles' experience, and how it contributes to our worldview. So remember that this novel is one representation of growing up in Australia. It's a fictional work, but it does combine with all those other experiences that we've had in our own lives, and that can be in the real world, and it can be the stories that we've been exposed to. So this story combines with all the other stories and experiences that we've had, and they help shape our worldview. They make us, or they contribute to our own understanding of who we are, what we believe in, what we stand for. So from there, what you need to be looking at, once you've formed an opinion about what Miles has learned, I think that's a really important thing that you need to come to explore in your podcast and then in your responses to text and the human experience. And for our assessment, and remember, you don't need a related text for the HSC. That's a really good thing. But for the assessment task with the related text that you need, you have to start thinking about what it is. What is the message of the related text? What is it that the central character comes to learn? And then ultimately from that, I've got another clicky. What have you learned about the role of stories and storytelling in shaping of your identity? So in looking at the related text, what has the character learned? And then how have you reflected on that in your own personal experience? So remember that we, from the syllabus, it says that we experience the world of the text, we reflect on that, and then we apply it to the real world. And that can be done in many different ways, but certainly the best responses are going to have a really clear voice about them, and you'll show that you've really thought about not just about what happens within your two texts that you pick, and you're obviously able to talk about how the novel or the film or whatever text it is, how it's been constructed, but more importantly, you're able to look at the impact of a fictional story on the development of your own character.